There were many factors that contributed to the growth of American industry, including the abundance of raw materials, a surge of technological innovations, and a supportive federal government. The innovations in the field of communications provided the most influential impact on the 19th century. One of the first of these inventions was the transatlantic cable laid by Cyrus Field, and a follow-up invention of the telephone by none other than Alexander Graham Bell. With these inventions came many others, including the invention of a radio, typewriter, and the most well-known of them all, the light bulb, influenced and created by Thomas Edison, one of the most successful inventors of the century. In communications, a surge of developments in transportation arose in the late 1800s, specifically the revolutionizing of iron and steel production. The Bessemer process, based upon discoveries by Robert Mouchet, William Kelly, and Henry Bessemer, developed an efficient process for converting iron into a much more durable and versatile steel. Later, Abram Hewitt introduced the open hearth process, allowing steel to be produced in mass quantities and larger dimensions. And as the new steel developments emerged, a necessity for petroleum also emerged, allowing a man named Edwin Drake to establish the first oil well in 1859. By 1917, nearly 5 million of Henry Ford's most famous cars were on the road. And around the same time, the Wright brothers tested, constructed, improved, and flew the first airplane between the years of 1899 and 1904. By 1915, the U.S. government created the National Advisory Committee on Aeromatics. The airplanes were used in World War I, and in the 1920s, Charles Lindbergh took on the first solo flight from New York to Paris. With these new developments, researchers began developing and sponsoring their own research operations. General Electric created one of the first corporate laboratories in 1900. Unfortunately, during this time, the government began declining in their support for research and research funding. Therefore, research development labs combined with engineers in order to broaden their work and gain sponsoring for both practical and basic research. Techniques in production began to emerge as developments continued to rise up with the industrial supremacy. Winslow Taylor developed Taylorism, which increased the employer's control of the workplace, subdivided tasks, and diminished manager versus one employee development. Henry Ford introduced the assembly line in 1914, which was both a concept and an action. This concept involved the thoughts from Taylorism, the interchangeability of parts, and allowed the raise of wages, reduce hours, and cut pricing on Ford's Model T. During this time, the expansion of railroads increased, new forms of corporate organizations emerged, and there was a significant increase of railroad trackage between 1860 to 1900. The merging of railroads began to rise, and tycoons such as Cornelius Vanderbilt and others rose to economic power. Limited liability was also introduced, bringing in interest to investors for stock, and great projects were taken on. Pennsylvania was one of the first to develop a new corporate form of organization. In steel, Andrew Carnegie opened his own steelworks in Pittsburgh in 1873, along with his associate Henry Frick. Banker J.P. Morgan later merged Carnegie's interest to create the U.S. Steel Corporation. The combination of corporations of the same enterprise were called horizontal integrations, and ones merging diverse enterprises were called vertical integrations. The most celebrated corporate empire of the time was John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, a successful vertical integration. Growing corruption criticisms forced the captains of industry to create a defense for their new corporate economy. Social Darwinism was a major concept that implied only the fittest individuals flourished in the marketplace. Philosopher Herbert Spencer supported this theory, and William Sumner promoted similar ideas in his famous book, Folkways. This concept appeals to corporate leaders with the same virtues, causing businessmen to fear and attempt to eliminate competition in the economy. The gospel of wealth implied that people of great wealth had not only the power, but the responsibility to advance social progress with their riches. Andrew Carnegie wrote a book about this implication, and Baptist minister Russell Conwell became a spokesman for the idea as he gave his famous lecture, acres of diamonds. This was also a rags to riches theory, which appealed to both men and women, including author Louisa May Alcott, who wrote about the ambitions and independence of women through the character Jo March. Other philosophies developed, such as one by Lester Ward, author of Dynamic Sociology, who thought civilization was not governed by natural selection but by human intelligence. He also believed in an active government. Others had more radical approaches, like the Socialist Labor Party, led by Daniel De Leon. Henry George, author of Progress and Poverty, proposed a single tax on land to replace all other taxes, which would return increment to the people and destroy monopolies, distribute wealth equality, and eliminate poverty. On the contrary, Edward Bellamy, utopian author of Looking Backward, had a vision of nationalism. Monopoly continued to grow, allowing industries to charge personally favored prices at high rates. Beginning in 1873, the economy erratically fluctuated, and severe recessions emerged. With the rise of factories and a large industrial workforce came dangerous working conditions and a growing sense of powerlessness for unhappy workers. As a massive migration of immigrants came in from abroad to escape poverty and oppression in homelands, a labor law was passed, which permitted employers to pay for the passage of workers and later deducting the amount from employees' wages. Ethnic tensions between immigrants also rose, causing competition between the ethnicities in mining, farm work, and factories. Workers could not rely on job security due to the boom and bust economic cycles and the instability caused by technological advances. There was a decrease in need for skilled workers and an increase in the use of women and children workers. At least 1.7 million workers under the age of 16 were employed in factories and fields, and under public pressure, states passed child labor laws. With the unhappiness of workers came the creation of national unions, representing small groups of skilled workers who faced a problem of widespread public hostility. Molly Maguires were a militant labor organization that used violence and even murder in their battle with coal operators. When railroads announced a 10% wage cut, the railroad strike of 1877 came into play. It was America's first major national labor conflict. In 1869, the Noble Order of the Knights of Labor was formed under the leadership of Uriah S. Stevens. They requested an 8-hour workday, the abolition of child labor, and more independence in the workplace. They also launched various strikes. The AFL, or the American Federation of Labor, concentrated on labor's immediate objectives: wages, hours, and working conditions. They launched many severe strikes, specifically one in Chicago where someone threw a bomb, killing 7 policemen. This was known as the Haymarket Bombing. Anarchism now became a code word for terrorism and violence. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers was the most powerful trade union in the country, consisting of skilled workers. However, Carnegie and Henry Frick disapproved of the association and decided it had to go. In response, the association called for a strike in 1892 called the Homestead Strike. They achieved temporary victory, but workers soon drifted back to their jobs and the Amalgamated surrendered. The Pullman Palace Car Company manufactured railroad sleeping and parlor cars. In 1893, the company experienced slashed wages by about 25%. Workers went on strike and persuaded the militant American Railroad Union, led by Eugene Debs, to support them by refusing to handle Pullman cars and equipment. Within a few days, workers in 27 states went on strike with paralyzed transportation from Chicago to the Pacific Coast. President Cleveland responded by forbidding the union to continue the strike. Overall, in the last decades of the 19th century, labor unions made few gains to their content, including the low raise of wages. However, the contract labor law was abolished, 8-hour workdays were established, and there was some compensation for injured workers. However, these were the only benefits achieved, but not directly from strikes and protests, which were represented by unions of small percentages, excluding unskilled workers and most women, blacks, and recent immigrants. They struggled with fighting against vast wealth and power, or corporations determined to crush efforts of defiant workers. In Chapter 17, readers learned about industrial supremacy's successes and downfalls. So what can we learn from this chapter? From a more conservative view, competition in the economy is good because it creates diversity between classes and wealth with a more complex economy. The government should not get involved with the economy because it interrupts free enterprise. thus taking away the right of freedom for opportunity. Technology developments were very good for the economy because it provided more opportunities for jobs. With the new technology, such as the assembly line, employers did not have to rely on certain employees because of interchangeable jobs. Not having to rely on anyone is good, because then one won't have mistakes or failures based off of someone else not being there or choices not being made. And from a lesser conservative point of view, competition in the economy can also be detrimental due to tensions between industries. As these tensions arose, industries were being built by work-absorbed men, treating workers poorly and unequally. As these tensions arose, violent strikes came with them. This would have been the perfect time for government intervention. The intervention could have helped provide equal treatment regarding gender, race, and ethnicity, as well as enforcing better working conditions and safer and sanitary areas for employees. Technological innovations provided a great rise to the world as far as communication and transformation and transportation goes. However, as self-made men continued to create instead of focusing on equal rights and organization in society, recklessness evolved, and bigger and older issues were being suppressed by men who had the power to solve them. As you can see, the 1800s went through serious changes involving communication and technology, steel, and also then the independence of workers, or at least the fight for independence for workers. They wanted better working conditions, better hours, better wages, and then you had the companies fighting back against them, and then the government kind of got involved when the president suppressed all the strikes. And based on the opinions that were just addressed, there are different ways that these problems could have been solved, different ways to interpret this era. The technological advances were obviously a success because here we are in the modern century, modern day, with telephones, cell phones, iPhones. We're very technologically focused, and thanks to this era, with all of these new innovations, all of these inventors, engineers, research developments, we had all of the supply and energy and drive to gain all these things and all the focus on it. And we had such great people that came from this era because they were so enlightened. This was like the modern day enlightened period, sort of, because we had all these new inventions. And so all of these things brought on great new opinions because some people thought that the workers deserved better conditions and that we should have focused more on developing rights. But then from the other side, people say, okay, well, we got that the next century, we developed all this new stuff, it takes time, the government shouldn't have been involved because all this new independency was good because people had the assembly lines, they weren't as dependent. And I personally can see it from both sides, and I actually had the latter opinion saying that the government should have been involved and that these people really were mistreated because, they had the people in the unsanitary conditions. I don't know if some of the pictures from this slide showed, what went on in the factories, but, there were kids that were in these environments. I've read different articles during this time where people were actually being hurt in their factories, and that was so neglective of the corporate owners. They were all focused on getting bigger and merging and, horizontal and vertical integrations. They were really focused on that, and they weren't as focused on the working conditions. And I think both sides kind of focuses on that because, of course, we all agree that the unsanitariness and all that could have been solved, with just a little bit of more effort. And so I guess that's where you get to put in your own point of view on history, and that's where politics comes into the picture and people's opinions, and that's how everything gets divided, which we see later in the century where politics becomes more involved in this kind of stuff, and that's where people start opposing it or going for it and getting all happy because, oh yeah, government's involved or not. So anyway, this area was a great time for our history. We had such great new inventions, developments, new ideas and proposals, and books on all of the new ideas and proposals. So thank you for watching our presentation by Mary Duet, Lizzie Hummel, and Sophia Gradishar.